Q&A at the end of the talk, but if you have any questions before that, please write them in the chat. Today, we have here with us Diana Phillips, a writer and editor of creative nonfiction. She's a co-editor of the recently published anthology called Choosing Judaism, 36 stories which feature personal essays written by Jews by choice. Today, she'll be reading her essay, Surely the Soul Sings Always, which is featured in the book. Diana fell in love with Judaism at ICAR and American Jewish University in Los Angeles, and currently works at the Reconstructionalist Rabbinical College in Philly. Thank you, Diana, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share my story today. And here is the book. And it was published in November. There are 36 stories from Jews of all different backgrounds. I went through the conservative movement. We have also, Reform and Orthodox and Reconstructionist. And we have stories from the US, Canada, Australia, France, Spain, and I think I might be missing one, but it's nice to hear the stories of people who had very different experiences, very individual stories, but also the common threads that connect the stories as well. So I think I'll start. I hope. Okay. So the essay is called Surely the Soul Sings Always. I had always felt a tugging curiosity about Judaism, but I never knew why until I discovered my grandfather's secret Jewish roots. The fact that we were once Jewish wasn't something we talked about in my family. I learned about my Jewish heritage from a cousin secondhand when I was 10. Did you know our last name wasn't always Phillips, he said. My grandfather never mentioned it. My father didn't either. The omission shocked and troubled me. When I questioned my father, it was clear he didn't want to discuss it. I wanted to know about my lineage. I wanted to hear the story that no one wanted to tell. In the spring of 1942, weeks after the death of his father, my then 20-year-old grandfather changed the family name and never looked back. His father had been abusive, and he refused to speak about him, even when I prodded. I was close with my grandfather, who I knew as a sweet old man who laughed at his own jokes, blessed strangers, and always had a smile for everyone he met. He was proud of the family he had created. I loved the way he pronounced my name like nobody else, as if it had a Y in the middle. My Diana, you're so pretty, he'd say, scrunching his face into a loving smile, with ruddy cheeks and squinting eyes. My grandfather had created a new identity for himself, but also for me. I often wondered, what if I had inherited his former name and been perceived as a member of the tribe from birth? Expressing my interest in our Jewish heritage felt off limits. How could I reject my family's chosen religion, Catholicism, to reclaim the one that had deliberately been abandoned? Even as a child, I didn't feel connected to Catholicism. When I discovered I had Jewish blood, it started to make sense. I was born to wrestle with God and life's biggest questions, but questioning the Catholic Church was not encouraged. At 12, in the months leading up to my confirmation, I had privately renounced Catholicism, but skipping this final sacramental rite of initiation was not an option. I was forced to go through the motions, including choosing a confirmation name after one of the saints. I did not pick Catherine to remember the patron saint of scribes and spinsters, but to honor my great-grandmother, someone I felt close to, even though she died before I was born. As I grew older, I searched for spiritual connection, perusing books on Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, but I never found a spiritual space that felt right to me, where I thought I belonged. I became an atheist by default when no other label seemed to fit. I believed I didn't need religion. But as I celebrated my 30th birthday, I felt profoundly disconnected. I had been living with a Jewish roommate for nearly a year before I asked if I could join her at services sometime. Is that allowed? Would I be welcome? These were sincere questions. I had never set foot in a synagogue before, or met a rabbi, or even eaten challah. My beloved grandfather had passed away, and I was finally ready to explore my Jewish roots. I attended my first Shabbat service in July 2012, preceded by a picnic in Roxbury Park. I remember taking it all in. Families seated cross-legged on blankets quilting the grass, sharing spreads of hummus and pita, olives, Israeli salad, and braided challah. A smiling man greeted me as I entered the prayer space. Shabbat Shalom, he said, handing me a folded prayer sheet with a quote by Rav Kook. As long as a person is constrained to wait for a time when the creative spirit will inspire her, and then she will create, meditate, sing. This is an indication that her soul has not yet been illuminated. Surely the soul sings always. The rabbi had changed the text to use female pronouns, and it felt like the words were directly meant for me. Tears welled, blurring my vision, and something in me shifted. It felt like my gray world suddenly burst into technicolor. The sky seemed bluer, the sun brighter. The warmth and joy that radiated from these people gathered in community filled me with an unfamiliar feeling. I didn't feel alone anymore. I found my spiritual home. I was not thinking about conversion when I enrolled in the Introduction to Judaism program at American Jewish University in Los Angeles a few months later. But by the end of the first session, it was clear I was on the path to becoming a Jew by choice. Choosing my Hebrew name excited me. My sponsoring rabbi asked if there was anyone in my family who I wanted to honor. This would be a good time to do that, he said. His words reminded me of something I had instinctually known when I adopted the name of my great-grandmother instead of a saint. For Jews, the tradition of naming is a sacred act, a chance to honor our loved ones and ensure that future generations carry not only our ancestors' names, but also their stories. My voice cracked as I failed to hold back tears in the rabbi's office while remembering my papi, Sam, and it became clear I would be named in his honor. There were several strong S names to choose from, but Shira, which means song, resonated most. I realized I had always felt Jewish. I just didn't know that was the word for it. Sitting before the Beit Din and submerging 3 times in the mikveh did not feel like a conversion, but an affirmation of my Jewishness, officially reclaiming my heritage. So that is the essay. I had started writing about my experience several years ago in more of like a memoir format. I was looking to write a whole book, and I decided for this to really focus on what I feel is my origin story, which is my connection to my grandfather, and the idea of naming, which has always been something that has fascinated me. Even as a small child, I was very interested in names and how that played a part in who we are and our identity. So like I said in the piece, it was very shocking to learn, that we had a different last name and that it was a secret. Really, my family did not want to talk about it. And it took a long time to really sort of get this story out of them. And what was interesting was that my grandfather, when he married my grandmother, who was Catholic, he didn't convert at that time, but after 25 years of marriage, he converted to Catholicism. And so I went back the other way. And unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to really talk about our experience of choosing spirituality and religion as an adult. which I think is an interesting thing that we share. It's when I was going through the process, it almost felt like, knowing that he loved me and would want me to be happy, that that I was able to have those conversations with him, even though he wasn't physically there to have them with me. And it definitely felt like a healing process for me. I would be interested to hear any questions that you have if you're wanting to know more about certain parts of my story or the book. And one of the other parts of my story that I didn't get into in the piece is, so when I was living in Los Angeles with that roommate and I started going to services, very quickly, like the following week after that first service, I was at a dinner party with her that was like a fundraiser for the synagogue. And she had had an extra ticket and brought me with her. And at that event, the executive director of ECAR, which was the community I was part of, she was at that dinner and was saying, "Oh, we're looking for somebody in the office if you know of anyone." And my roommate said, "Diana's looking for a new job." And so I sent them my resume. And within the week, I was the new assistant to the head rabbi, Sharon Brous, who is very inspirational. And she was the one that, changed the pronouns in that text and gave another sermon, which I don't think I mentioned in here, that really, filled me up. And so I knew nothing about Judaism at that point. Like, it was 3 weeks before the High Holy Days. And so it was really just jumping right in. And so do you have a question? No. So it was an exciting thing to be immersed in that way, and be surrounded by this community who was very welcoming. And I wasn't turned away like some people are when they're looking to get into the Jewish space. Did you have a question, Aaron?
I did.
Yes.
How did your family, who I gather, if you had sisters or brothers or mothers, fathers, whatever, cope with you converting to Judaism all of a sudden?
Right. So I think that when I first started, I had been working at the synagogue, and it was a few months later when I started to take the class. And at the time, honestly, I didn't even think of conversion. Like, I just wanted to learn more. Like, I was in this new environment. I was curious about it. And so very quickly, like, I knew for myself that it was right, but I didn't really kind of go into that with them right away until I was really sure that, this was going to happen. And like, I was in Los Angeles and they were here in Philadelphia. And so, we didn't have any like overlapping community or anything like that. So I think at first when I started taking the class, my father was just like confused why anyone would be interested in taking any type of class. He's just not someone who takes classes. And I love that. Like, I'm always taking classes. And so, they didn't really, they didn't discourage me. They didn't encourage either. They just sort of said, if that's what makes you happy, then go ahead and pursue it. And my grandmother, who had married my Jewish grandfather, she's very religious. She was someone that went to church very regularly, a couple times a week. And we were really best friends, but we didn't talk about like religion or politics. Like, those were the things we just didn't discuss. And so I didn't tell her prior to, going to the Beit Din. And she actually heard it from a cousin, because I had posted something on Facebook and somebody reached out to her and said, "Oh, congratulations." And she's like, "On what?" And so she wasn't the happiest that I didn't include her, but I was afraid that even in her silence, that I would feel a judgment. And I didn't want to bring that into, the mikveh. So, that day I gave her a call and I read her a story, not this exact piece, but some parts of my story at that point, and, explained to her why I had done this. And it was funny, the next day there was a family wedding, which I did not attend, but she was there, my parents and everything. And people were saying like, oh, Diana did this. And so instead of being upset, she was like, oh, they don't just let anybody in. Like, she was already proud. And, that meant a lot to me. Yes. Janet.
Do you think?
Diana, I think you mentioned at the beginning of your story, this was 1942 when your great-grandfather made the choice.
Mhm.
Was this related to World War II? Were they in Europe? Were they in America? Was it incidental that he chose to give up the family Judaism?
So they were in Philadelphia. His father had emigrated from Hungary, and his mother was also of Hungarian descent, but was here already. She was born in the US. He was the middle of three brothers. And growing up, like I mentioned, his father was just like abusive and just was not a nice person. And it had been an arranged marriage. And so it wasn't a happy marriage, wasn't a happy household. And so at a certain point, I think it was about 2 years before this, I think it was 1940, his father, they basically said, you need to leave. And so he left. And then he ended up getting sick and he died. At that time, I think that they felt it was like a clean break, a new start, that they didn't have to be tied to this like negative person. And so my grandfather, he decided for the family, for his mother and his two brothers, that they would change the name and that they would take his middle name, which was Philip, and turn it to Phillips. So I think personally that is interesting to me, since he was the middle brother. Like, he wasn't even the oldest, but he sort of took charge and really created this new family. So I think that answers your question.
Do you know what the family name was? Do you know what your Jewish?
I do. So it was Greenstein. So unmistakably, Jewish. And so when he was growing up in Philadelphia at the time, he was known as Greenie in the neighborhood. And I think that one of the things that I don't really know how he felt like growing up with it, but I know that at the time, like with the World War II, he changed the name and 2 weeks later was in the army with his new name. So that answers another part of your question. So he really
Did you convert in California or in Philadelphia?
in California. So
Do
I
you think
converted.
you would have had you not gone to California? California is a place that is more accepting of that, I think, than Philadelphia is why I asked.
Right. It's a fascinating question because honestly, like, it's not something that I ever imagined, like, I think that it excites me when life presents opportunities that you didn't even know were right for you. So it was not something that I was like seeking out in any way, except for that like tugging curiosity that I wanted to know more about my heritage that always felt so off limits. And so that was like the seed of it. And then I happened to be living with a roommate who I knew from college, and her family all lived out there, and they would go to services and I'd see them, getting ready for the High Holy Days and for Purim and different things. And so I felt like I could ask, like I really didn't know what the feeling was like in the Jewish community about like outsiders coming into, the synagogue. I had no idea, and was happily greeted and welcomed. So I appreciated that for sure. But I don't know, like, if I had not moved there, if I had not lived with her, if I would have found this. you know?
Mhm.
So I feel very lucky that, things just progressed. And then
So
also,
you work for a synagogue in California. What do you do now in Philadelphia?
so now I'm working for the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. I work in the admissions office and student life, and also with the rabbinic internships. And so
That
it,
helped you stay connected more.
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's good.
because it was hard moving back from California, where really my whole adult life had been there and my Jewish community was there. And so when I moved back here a few years ago to be near my family, um, I didn't have a community at all. And like prior to the pandemic, where now I can connect with Ikar from afar, I really didn't. I struggled with that, not having that connection. So this working in this environment, it does bring like a satisfaction to my life. Like I feel like the work that I'm doing is to help guide people on their spiritual journey and like help facilitate that for them. So I feel like it's a worthwhile pursuit.
Is
Um,
the organization the conduit by where you found the other essays, the other people who you included in your book?
That's what I was going to ask, is how you found the people.
yeah. So the way that I became involved in this project was the other author, Bradley Caro Cook. He had come up with the idea and initiated it. And I saw the call for essays. So I had sent in my essay, not even knowing that he was looking for someone to edit the book. And then right before the deadline to submit, he had hosted a writing workshop over Zoom, and it was led by a woman, a journalist in Los Angeles who I knew. And so she ended up referring me to him, and that's how I got connected with the book. So, you know, he ended up like choosing the essays, and I chose like the order that they would appear in and sort of balance out the different stories. And I was the one that did the actual editing of the pieces. So it was an interesting process for me, reading them over and over again. And by the end, when I was reading like the final manuscript, I was reading this one story from a woman who was born in Germany in 1934, and her family had to flee. They weren't Jewish at the time. That happened later for her. But like in reading her story after I'd read it like 5 times already, it moved me. So that was something that I thought was really interesting about the process.
Did you, amongst the 36 people who wrote for you,
Mhm.
I have another question too, but amongst the 36 that wrote for the book, and I assume maybe there were others that didn't make the cut, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, did you find any themes, any commonalities?
um, I think there were themes. Like there were a few different things. Like sometimes people had a great experience and sometimes people were turned away and it took them years and years to actually like break in and get, their foot in the door. So like those were two different things that were
Experiences,
themes.
yeah, yeah.
Um and then uh just trying to think. I think also like identity and sort of not feeling like you fit
Get
in
in.
growing up,
Hmm.
and sort of like finding your tribe. Like that's definitely a theme in the book. And I'm not the only person who sort of felt like I had always felt Jewish and didn't know the word for it. Like there were other people who mentioned that they
Yeah.
felt they had Jewish souls and it just took them that time to like realize that's what that was. Um,
Okay.
those were some of the themes.
The other question I was going to ask is, um, when I was teaching religious school, I was teaching older kids, like bar mitzvah age kids,
Mhm.
and one of the topics I tried to do exotic sort of things. Um, to keep interest and that kind of thing. And one of the things we talked about was crypto Jews. And I was wondering if you came across any people who, had Jewish background from, like you had it pretty close by. I mean, your great grandfather was Jewish, but, whose families had been in in Spain or Portugal or in South America or like that, nowadays they'd be in the Southwest United States, perhaps, or Mexico, and had all these customs going on in their lives, and all of a sudden figured out that they had Jewish background and decided to convert. Did you find any of those type situations?
There were one or two other stories that people had sort of suspected that they had Jewish heritage, but it took them digging to find it. Like there was one person who had gone to visit their grandmother or something, and like there was a mezuzah on the door. And like, that was like a little clue that like there is something here.
Yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah. And she had a bunch of like Jewish magazines like in her living room, and so the person who was writing the essay like felt this connection, but their parent was not supportive of it. So it was sort of just like, don't tell anyone, just keep this to yourself, and not encouraging. So that was a theme too. Several people had families that were not supportive, which is sad. And I feel lucky that was not my experience.
Yeah. I imagine it can be traumatic for family members if they're whatever religion they're leaving and whatever religion they're going to.
Right. Because one of the things about being, a Jew by choice is that for holidays and things, like I don't have a Jewish family to celebrate with. So other people who might be my community have sometimes welcomed me to their table, which is very appreciated. But, it's harder when you do come from the outside, and that there isn't that like family support and structure. So sometimes it takes a little bit more to maintain Jewish practices, like after you go through the 18-week course where you're really studying and, being part of a community. So, Erin, I don't know if you had another question that got cut off. No.
Could you speak a little bit more about, you just mentioned you have 18 classes you have to take, or 18 weeks. Can you talk more about the process you had to go through?
Sure. So the class was the first thing, and every week was a different topic. So, one week we talked about God, and then we talked about the Shoah, and we talked about Pesach. Like each week was a different topic. And I adored the rabbi who was teaching my session. He was actually a little younger than me. He was like a new, young, bright person who was very relatable. And he's actually the director of the Intro to Judaism program at American Jewish University. So he's been there for a number of years now. And it was an interesting experience because some of the people in the class were, converting because of marriage. And so the couple would take the class together. And other people like me were just single and interested in our own. And then there was actually one guy who was not interested in converting at all. He just loved to learn things. And so he wanted to know more. And so that was his story. But it was nice to have that community. And after the class ended, I was like really sad because, you had that staple every week and you knew you were going to go and have like this intellectual and spiritual space to explore. And so I really pestered the rabbi to create like a 2.0, like continue on with this. And so he did. We had like sort of an alumni group. And so every month he would put on like one or two programs that would be either a learning or an activity to keep us engaged. And that was very helpful and appreciate it.
I have a question. I'm Carol. Hi.
Hi.
I know that it is difficult when you are stepping away from your own family background, but does it kind of force you to find your own community, to create a household where other people who are Jewish will come to you, and thereby you kind of at the same time you are offering the hospitality, you are gaining your own new family, your own community, and can set your own traditions for your household going forward. Is that a help, or do you find other ways of masking that that problem of not having the support group in the background?
Right. So that's an interesting question. I think it depends on the individual situation. Like if you're converting and your partner is Jewish, it's much easier to then, celebrate Shabbat each week and to have a practice and to invite people over to your table. Whereas someone like me, I didn't have that like continued support, and I never felt, and I still don't really feel like confident enough to like host. But I definitely appreciate like being invited to other people's tables. And so I do have a couple of people who have been really thoughtful in inviting me over and saying, they realizing that I don't have anyone else to celebrate with. And the reality is that if I don't celebrate with them, like I'm probably not going to be doing anything to celebrate Shabbat. It's nice that they've included me. And then now with the pandemic being everything being online, I've really appreciated going to services again on Friday nights and having that connection. And this year was the first year in maybe 4 years that I was able to go to the High Holy Day services, and it was just so needed and refreshing to, have that again.
Without trying to get too personal, in principle, how important do you think it is for someone who is converted to then look for a spouse who is already Jewish?
I think it's individual. I think for me, my personal feeling is that while it would be wonderful to be able to share that with a partner, and I would really love that, if I met someone who was not Jewish, but was just accepting and, welcoming of that, I wouldn't say no, like right off the bat, because of my own personal history. Like my grandparents were a mixed faith marriage, and they made it work and were married for over 60 years. And so had they said, oh no, you're a different religion, I'm not going to get with you, like I wouldn't be here. So I think that's my feeling is you never know where life's going to take you. So even if you do meet a partner who isn't Jewish, that doesn't mean that they aren't going to, become part of the community and like want to pursue that in the future. Like my grandfather was with my grandmother for 25 years before he like made it official that he was going to be part of her religion. So that's my feeling on that.
I have another question that's basically the same thing, and dealing with support, because it is important to find community in Judaism. But there are several organizations that I get, weekly invitations, like, Project Inspire, or a lot of things from Aish Torah or Chabad.org or 18 Doors, or any of these from all different denominations that are outreaches to people to try and get them to be part of now a Zoom or a YouTube event in preparation for holidays or Shabbat. Have you tried any of these as an individual, and do you find any of them, do you find them helpful? I mean, I've actually attended a few, just to see what they were like. And some more helpful than others. Some of them I just felt like they didn't get me at all. Are you finding any sites that are useful in that regard, again, to help you further your own personal journey and support you?
Right. So I think for me, I've sort of relied on my two LA communities of ECAR and also the American Jewish University um, intro group. And luckily, they're both very active in doing adult learning and having events that I can tap into. I don't think I've really gotten involved with too many other organizations, although I wouldn't rule that out. As like sometimes you just don't know what's out there. Like if you're coming from the outside, sometimes you just don't know. So yeah. Was there another?
One of the things I've found interesting in Zooming, not Zooming, but YouTubing, Shabbat services occasionally, is that while I can sign in to go to Mikveh Israel, which is my synagogue in Savannah, which I do pretty often, before or after I can see a bunch of other Shabbat synagogues that are doing Shabbat services. And occasionally we'll go to Yeshurun up in New York, or, you know, a different place. It's kind of interesting. I did that on Kol Nidre, actually, and went to ours and then went to two others, not the whole service, obviously, but just connected in to see what they were doing and how they were. And it was, it was, you know, it kind of made Kol Nidre, which we couldn't go in person. It certainly made it different, but it made it a different level of interesting.
Yeah, I haven't really gone to that many other places since I am so happy with my own community. But a few weeks ago, somebody recommended a place in San Francisco, and they sent me the link like, oh, check out this cantor. I think you'd really like them. And there are a few places in Philly where I know people here now. So I've been here or there, but not on a permanent basis to be connected. But yeah, it's wonderful that you can pop in to different services and really get a taste of what's out there. I feel like it's really opened up the possibilities in so many ways. Does anybody else have any questions?
I'll be
I
happy
don't
to
have a
hear.
question, but just as a matter of information, my wife was born in Philadelphia, still has a lot of family up there. Our youngest son went to Penn. So we have spent a lot of time off and on in Philadelphia. And I don't know whether you're into delicatessens, but famous 4th Street Deli is one of the best in the whole country. You ought to try it.
I'll have to go there because I don't think I've been to the 4th Street Deli.
It's one of the entirely best in the, better than anything you can get in New York right now. It's really, really good. But I like Philly. It's a neat city.
It is. It has a lot of culture and history, and it's an interesting place too.
The fella that helped Savannah design its restoration projects here was I think an architect in Philadelphia by the name of Edmund Bacon. And he came down here and consulted and helped Historic Savannah get started on its road to preservation. So Society Hill, it's different, but it has a lot of similarities to the historic district here in Savannah.
Is that Kevin Bacon's father?
I don't know. I only know the name. The other name, I have no idea.
It might be.
Could be.
Yeah.
Diana, can you give us some more details about your book? Where can we find it?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon. Here's the cover again. It's called Choosing Judaism, 36 Stories. So if you just type that in, you'll be able to find it. And my name, you'll find it. it's interesting to kind of see the different stories, and people have focused on different things. Like I focused on naming, some other people focused on like their wedding rituals that were a weigh-in. Some people focused on Shabbat. One essay focused on the mikvah and the idea of immersion. Let's see some of the other ones. Yeah, and we do have a few essays from people who grew up internationally. So there's one essay from an Australian, so she was able to talk about like the differences there. And we have another one, a woman that grew up in Spain, and another one in France. And so to me, that was interesting. They had different things. Like the woman in France, I think one of the things was she went into a shop. She wanted to buy the Talmud, and like she didn't realize that it was like a whole series, and she was expecting just like a book. And so it was like a comical thing that was in her story. There's trying to see here. Yeah, people just have all different things. Like a couple people like me had family connections. Some people grew up with like one Jewish parent and one Catholic parent, and so they always felt like they were culturally Jewish, but like on the technicality, like they weren't considered Jewish. And so they went through the process. There's another person who is a secular Jew and felt like that was his path. And yeah. Did you have any like specific questions about the book, or just, yeah. It's
Does anybody have any other questions?
oh, I think you're
I'm not quite sure how to ask this one. I'll just give a stab and you can respond to it.
sure.
But you primarily have been talking about your own experience and how you started out one way and ended up another way.
Mhm.
And one of the things I've always wondered about, and I don't really know how people who are born Jewish do it either, other than through the parent, just kind of chronic teaching, but exposure, I guess, is about Israel and how you make the connection to Israel. If you do, I'm not talking about you personally, I'm talking about people who convert in general. That's not something that if you're raised, in your case, Catholic, that's something people, I mean, it's part of the Catholic history for 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but it's not something that the spiritual connection or whatever, the importance of Israel is not something that you would learn growing up.
Right.
And I'm just curious as to how if that develops, or if that's just a part that you're aware of but don't really participate in so much. And I'm not, again, talking about you personally. You can answer for yourself, but maybe you heard something, you picked up something in the book.
Right. So I think it's different for everyone. Like by the time I converted, I had aged out of birthright.
Right.
And so that wasn't an option. And there is another program that I would love to do, which is Honeymoon Israel, but I'm single, so that hasn't happened yet. It's on my list. But I do feel like personally for me, Israel is sort of something that I don't have a strong connection with yet. And I do need to explore and I do need to go there. Because I think it's hard to really develop that
Yeah, right.
from far. Like if I was there, if I was feeling it and seeing it and being a part of it, I think I would have a connection.
Can't go yet. I can tell you that.
No,
No.
no, not now.
And if you do go, you can't come back yet either.
Yeah.
That's another.
One thing you might do is get in contact with your local federation. And if you have any connections there or can find any, they may have a program that you don't know about.
That's true. It's true. Once we can start to travel again,
I understand.
I'll be
Well,
happy.
so we have a son and 10 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren there. So we haven't been in a year, and we used to go only 3 or 4 times a year. So it's very difficult for us.
Okay. What part of Israel are they living in?
They live in Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
Yeah, but I also have a cousin whose family, he died, but he was the only survivor from over 30 family members I had from the Holocaust. And he was sent to Israel, to Hebrew University in 1937 or something like that. And his parents, who were living in Poland, said, you can't come home, just stay there and make your life. And he did, and he got married, and he had 2 kids, and his children had 5 kids, and now they got a big family. They live in Tel Aviv. So.
Yeah, it's moving.
But I agree with you. In your progression, I think you have the right idea. You ought to go to Israel, and when you go, I think you can learn a lot on your own. But if you go on an organized tour, you will get the best tour guides available, and you will get a very, very Jewish, pro-Israel perspective. But that may help you in your journey, as opposed to going by yourself and having to personally seek out everything.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely would want to go with a group.
Right.
I don't speak Hebrew, so that would be a barrier.
Everybody there speaks English, or almost everybody. You won't have a problem with that.
Yeah,
Okay, that's
and
good.
and the tour guides can specialize in lots of different stuff. There's some that are more traditional. There's some that are less. There's some that are focused on the religion, and the others who focus on the history. I had one. He wasn't all that great, but one that was more of a nature buff for part of mine. And yeah, that made it interesting for sure. But most of ours was done by a history buff, because that's what I'm interested in. But so there's lots of variety of types of tours.
We used to take business associates of ours. We were in the jewelry business, so we bought diamonds there. We bought jewelry made in Israel there on business trips, and Jewish tour guides knew more about Baptists and Catholics than my business friends did, who were Baptists and Catholics. So you can get a very balanced view from the tour guides, because they have to pass these rigorous government tests of knowledge in order to get a license to be a tour guide. We actually went on a wine tour with a tour guide at maybe our 50th trip there. We'd seen everything there was to see. So you'll have fun when you go.
Yeah, I'm excited to have that as something to look forward to.
Well, thank you so much, Diana, for joining us today. It was great. Next week, we have Rabbi Haas joining us, and he will be talking about the biggest small personalities in the Torah. So hopefully see everybody next week.